is a cluster full of lapsed customers who haven't bought from you in a long time. MailChimp creates highly personalized marketing across email and SMS to win back your lapsed customers.
I'm back, baby.
Intuit MailChimp.
Sometimes you gotta push yourself to the limits. Even if your limit is snowplowing at like 3 miles per hour.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Thank you. Thank you for being here. You can hear me all right? Okay. My name is Marcia Eli. I am here on behalf of the Brooklyn Public Library, the library's Arts and Culture team, BPL Presents, and the Center for Brooklyn History. And it's really my privilege to welcome you to tonight's program, Centering Voices of Rikers, which is co-presented with the Rikers Public Memory Project and Freedom Agenda. So just this past Friday, Rikers detainee Manuel Luna died. We are in the first month of 2024, and already Luna's is the second death this year. That makes a total of 30 deaths on Mayor Adams' watch. The level of violence and lack of transparency has Rikers facing a potential federal takeover. And this morning there was a closed Rikers rally outside of the mayor's State of the City address. This is not a new conversation. And tonight we are truly honored to be joined by 5 leaders who have been working for a long time to tell the reality of Rikers and ultimately shut it down. In a minute, you'll learn more about them, but I would be remiss if I did not note that the incarcerated and formerly incarcerated community is deeply important to the Brooklyn Public Library. Our Justice Initiatives team works in this space every day. They provide library services within prison and jails, including Rikers. They provide re-entry services for people coming home, one-on-one support, and our Tell a Story program, which allows people in 10 New York State prisons to connect with their families via free video calls hosted at library branches across the borough. You may have seen the Justice Initiatives literature that's on a table over there as you came in. I would be happy, I'd be overjoyed to share more about this work with anyone interested after the program. Now let me say a word about how tonight will go. We will be listening to oral history excerpts, part of a large and growing collection created by the Rikers Public Memory Project. We'll ultimately hear 4 short excerpts of firsthand experiences about Rikers, followed by reflections from our panel of experts and activists. Towards the end, we're going to turn it over to you, so you all have a chance to ask your questions. Now, it's my pleasure to invite Piper Anderson, the driving force, or one of the driving forces behind the Rikers Public Memory Project, up here to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcia. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Centering Voices of Rikers. My name is Piper Anderson. I'm the co-founder and co-director of the Rikers Public Memory Project. And to kick us off, we're going to start with our first moment of listening. So we're going to bring up Elizabeth's clip.
I don't belong here. I'm at this age where no one should have to tell me what to do, say, talk, use the bathroom, shower. Tell me I can't shower. Tell me I can't use the bathroom. Tell me I have to strip whenever you're ready. If they would have a clear mind, like how I can speak for myself, I was never on no medication in there. Yeah, I cried, but when I cried, I got referred to a psychiatric lady. Why should I be referred to a psychiatric lady? Yeah, it's supposed to be natural that I cry, that I miss my child. It's supposed to be natural that I miss the everyday things of life that I sacrificed to be in prison, you know? But in their eyes, you're not supposed to cry. You're not supposed to feel that way. You're supposed to hold that in, bottle it up, take this medication and block it out. But when you block it out, you come back in these streets and you do the same thing to bring you back in there because you never sat there and realized what you really went through. And I analyzed that, and I even told one of the doctors in there that one day when I got referred to her, they was like, oh, you got a doctor appointment downstairs, Harrison? And I'm like, doctor's appointment? So I'm like, all right, hey, you know, anything to get out the dorm, you know, just to walk through the hallway, just to get out the dorm because you're sitting there confined in the dorm. So I said, okay, I get downstairs. The lady like, oh, you was referred to by the captain. I said, the captain? She said, yeah. I'm like, so I started thinking back, and I'm like, oh, I saw the captain the other day. And I was crying when I was walking down the hallway, but I think I was walking down the hallway by myself. And then, you know, a vision of just, Liz, this is really where you at. You're in jail. Like, what the, you doing here? Like, oh my God, what are you doing here? And I guess the tears started rolling out my eyes, and the captain stopped me, like, are you okay? And I said, yeah, I'm okay. She was like, what's wrong? I said, you know, just the reality of me missing my child. I didn't think nothing about it. Next thing I know, I was being referred to the psychiatric clinic. Like, no. The lady like, would you like any medication? No, I'm okay. I want to feel this. I want to see this. I want to know that this is not nowhere that I need to be back at. Mm-hmm. You know, so.
So that was Elizabeth Harris, one of our narrators in the project. To date, the oral history collection for the project has more than 120 narratives, making it the largest collection of oral histories documenting the legacy of Rikers. The collection is available through our website, and in 2023 we donated it to the first 100 to the New York Public Library as well. So Elizabeth's story, you know, in that moment, she's talking about the use of psychotropics as a means of control within Rikers. And it's a very common story that we hear in the collection a lot through interviews with people about the use of mental health services in an abusive way. A little bit more about Elizabeth. She grew up in the Bronx. She arrived at Rikers in 2015 for a weapons charge. At Rikers, she worked in the tailoring shop, making sheets and towels. She also worked the suicide watch and did janitorial labor. In her interview with us, she recalls how guards would pay her in sugar to clean the cell block floors, but then reclaim the sugar when doing cell searches. She developed friendships with other incarcerated women, including one who is now her best friend. She witnessed Rikers officials over-medicate and sedate the incarcerated population. Harrison describes aggressive, disrespectful, and dismissive behavior on the part of Rikers officers, including an incident in which she and other incarcerated people had to turn and face the wall when the warden walked through their cell blocks. And stories like hers is the reason why we started the Rikers Public Memory Project in 2018. Our mission is to collect and make visible the stories of people most impacted by Rikers Island, to mobilize action toward repairing its generational harms and interrupting the dehumanizing narratives about people who have experienced firsthand the U.S.'s only remaining penal colony. Our vision is a New York City and a society that has chosen a culture of care over punishment. By sharing these stories, we hope to change the narrative about those incarcerated Rikers by creating spaces for people to speak their truth while leaning deeper into messages about the fundamental human rights of all people, irrespective of their charges. By preserving a history told through the voices of directly impacted people, we hope to prevent racial disparities in who owns the narratives about Rikers, including who educates the larger public, who analyzes its lessons for future policy. This helps prevent abuses and racial disparities from reoccurring and promote a new system that is restorative, that is focused on community care and healing. So I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. Throughout the evening, as we move through this conversation, we'll share a few other clips as well from the collection. But we hope that beyond this, that you'll continue to stay engaged with the project and with our work by joining us for the range of community programs that we're going to be offering throughout the year, listening to the oral histories in the collection, and also volunteering with us, because our volunteers are really the heart of the project and make it possible for us to do all the things that we do. I want to thank the Center for Brooklyn History for hosting us tonight, and also my colleague Andrea Nelson, who is here as well and has worked really hard to help put this event together as well. And if you have questions about how to get involved with the project, you should definitely talk to her. Where is Andrea? Raise your hand. Oh, she's waiting for, she's still working. She's waiting for, there she is. Okay, waiting for a top secret guest that's coming. So with that, I'm gonna invite up our moderator to kick off our conversation, Marlon Peterson, who is the Executive Director of College and Community Fellowship and the author of Bird Uncaged. Come on up.
Good evening, everyone. I am. So I want to invite up also two of the folks that we'll be in conversation with this evening, Darren Mack. Come right on in, Darren. And Kelly Briem. We will have, we're expecting one more person, one more panelist, council member Wrestler. We're expecting him to be here, so he'll join us at some point during the conversation, hopefully. But we know how elected officials can be. I first of all, thank you, Piper, for putting this together once again, and for being able to congregate this room full of people, as well as the folks that we're going to be in conversation with. I know this has been, we've known each other for years, and I know this work has been deeply personal to you and important to you. I want to first center this conversation in this, and it's from like personal and real-time experiences. And it has to deal with the, I can say, the irony of memory and thinking about Rikers Island and Rikers Memory, of the Rikers Memory Project. And really quick, so I have an elderly parent, my father, who has dementia. And last night it was rushed to the ER, and it's a live thing happening right now. We've been dealing with it for some years right now. And I was speaking to a colleague who came here this evening, along with me from College and Community Fellowship, and it was kind of saying, like, looking into his eyes, I see nothing in it, the illness of it. See nothing. I don't know what memories are there, or what scrambled or fragmented things are there. The importance of this sort of work, and thinking about the Rikers memory work, we can't allow the dimensioning, I'm gonna create a word, the dimensioning of Rikers Island and the stories and the people who have had survived it, and the families of people who have survived it. And so I want to center it, one, in the seriousness of the conversation, applauding the folks and thanking the folks who have been able to survive it and are still doing work around. I'm sure there's many folks in the room as well. But I just wanted to sort of like start the curation that way. So Darren, Kelly, you could just start off by sharing a little bit more about your work. I know there's a bio. I don't tend to go deeply into bios, but if you can sort of share about your work through, and obviously we'll know a little bit more about the work that you have been doing and are doing. And also, we get into some really deep sort of thoughts about their work, but also some more audio clips about other folks who we are bringing into the room in this conversation. Darren?
Is it on? Okay, yeah. So, yeah, my name is Darren Mack, he, him pronouns, and I'm a co-director of a grassroots organization called Freedom Agenda, which is a grassroots organization, member-led organization that's dedicated to organizing people and communities that's directly impacted by incarceration in order to achieve decarceration and system transformation. So we have a slightly broad definition of what directly impacted is. Not only do we include like people who actually experience incarceration, but we also include family members, you know, who family members or loved ones who experience incarceration, because we believe that if a mother is incarcerated, that impacts the children. You know, we believe that, you know, siblings, you know, a household and the household is incarcerated, that impact, you know, the family and the household. So, you know, not only are we member-led, you know, our members came up with the name Freedom Agenda. Our members, they co-facilitate our monthly members meetings. Our members, you know, they do so much because they're passionate about it. But we also, Freedom Agenda is also probably one of the organizations that has the largest member base of people, family members who lost their loved ones on Rikers Island. You know, like for Tamara Carter lost her son Brandon. Who else? So many. Lysandra, one of our members, lost her son on a boat, actually, which is a barge adjacent to the Bronx that actually was emptied last year. And yet so many family members, you know, sisters, brothers, but also Freedom Agenda, along with over 180 organizations throughout the city, is leading the campaign to close Rikers Island. And that's kind of like the core work that we do.
Thank you, thank you. Kelly?
Can y'all hear me? All right. Good evening, beautiful people. My name is Kelly Briem. I'm currently a social worker. I am a clinical case coordinator for pretrial supervised release. I'm formerly incarcerated, a trafficking survivor, and DV survivor. My advocacy work is what drives me to pay forward, because my own incarceration, the women, is why I'm here. It's not the courts, it's not anything else but my sisters. And that is who gets me through the day. And currently, I'm a member of the Justice for Women Task Force and Beyond Rosie's campaign, which is part, woo,
All right now, okay.
Woo! Love my sisters. The Women's Community Justice Association. I also do some policy advocacy work with various different campaigns, the PLAN Act. Currently there's the CARE Act, which will start up, as well as elder parole, treatment not jails. We could go all day. But yeah, and it's to give back and to give voice, because as a former incarcerated woman, many of my sisters were left invisible and voiceless. And the stories need to be told. What you went through is validated. You are real, and the pain you feel is real. And we love you, and you're not alone. And together, we'll get through it and never be forgotten. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. No. If you could share a little bit more, share if you can, a little bit your connection to the Rikers Memory Project also, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, so, you know, I was incarcerated at Rikers at the age of 17 for like 19 months when the population was over 20,000 people detained there at the time. And, you know, ultimately, I was sentenced to 20 to 40 years in prison, came home, and heard about the Khalif Browder case. I'm sure people know about that case now. And I'm like, I couldn't believe that Rikers Island was still happening after, you know, decades later, with like probably less than half the population that it was, you know, 20 years ago. And I got involved with the campaign work, and it was the summer of 2016. I think the title of a panel was Mass Story Lab, or your Mass Story Lab, right? Yeah. And I was on a panel to talk about, you know, my experience and, you know, why I wanted to get involved. So that was like my first engagement with, you know, with this work. And yeah, it was amazing. It was an energetic year. Yeah, it's just so much to say about it. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, Kelly, how did you get involved with the Memory Project, the Rikers Memory Project?
I got involved through the Justice for Women Task Force, where they collaborated with Piper and the Rikers Public Memory Project for women and gender expansive to tell their narrative. And I will say it is one of the most healing processes, because I was in a good enough place to tell my story, and I know there's a lot of components of my story. I tell bits and pieces, but because I had internalized and conditioned the stigma and the shame and the labels that were placed upon me for way too long, and I believed, you know, Soren Kierkegaard said, once you label me, you negate me. And I believed those labels, and I was able to tell the story. And then when I listen to the other stories, I'm like, it's the shared lived experience. Our journeys are different. Our journeys are unique. How we got here is all unique. But my empathy and compassion and my heart and more stories need to be told. We are not invisible. We are not forgotten. We are human beings who have so much to give. So then I became a member of the Rikers Public Memory Project Advisory Board, which I was able to be part of, which was amazing, to hear different perspectives. And again, here's community. Come together with a goal and work together. That's it.
You know, before we go, thank you for that. Before we go into the next audio clip, you know, we often think about, well, like, why is it important to document these stories? But I want to ask sort of a different twist on that. What happens when we do not document these stories? I want to start with you, Kelly, particularly as you sort of center in women and invisibility. Like, what happens when we don't document these stories?
We repeat. History repeats. So an example, Darren was talking about when he, you know, was first incarcerated. I was incarcerated in the 90s. In 1996, an estimated 13,000 women passed through Rikers. Let that sink in, because it only holds maybe, I think, 300, 500. 13,000 women in 1 year. A lot of those stories, unfortunately, will never be told because nobody cared. Nobody listened because of rhetoric and et cetera. The stories need to be told because we will repeat it again. It will happen again. History will repeat. And you can see the numbers going up now. The deaths are going up now. The conditions are less than dead. If you don't know what that means, especially in the street, if you have that stigma, that label, less than dead. Alive, you're less than dead. Your story's not told. Your pain was for naught. And they're human beings. And I think it's so, so important that people understand. Because not everybody has an impacted, although the numbers and the population, somebody knows a friend, a family member, et cetera. However, some people don't even know Rikers is a jail. It's a jail. It's not a prison. And if you don't know, then you can't come up with solutions, you know? Some people don't want to know. That's a different story. But there's some people that are curious that want to know. We're people. We're not some weird unicorn that comes out of nowhere. We're not what the label is like. We're, pardon me, this makes my skin crawl. We're not violent. We're not aggressive. I'm not looking to rip you off. I'm not looking to roll you. And these, just like we become conditioned, people that don't have awareness become conditioned, and that's where the stereotype and the labeling and the stigma, you know.
Yeah. History repeats itself. What about you, Darren? What happens when we don't document, and we click on documenting these stories? What are the possibilities that could happen?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the nail. No, you hit it on the nail. The hell, nothing much to really add, except for, like, you know, it makes me think about what if we never documented what happened in other institutions throughout history, like Attica, you know? What if we didn't document, you know, what happened at Auschwitz, you know, different places where, you know, sites and institutions that has a history that's rooted in violence and death, you know? And you said it, like, you know, things, it could repeat itself. And I think it's important to capture these voices so we learn from them. And yeah, and try to do better.
I'm gonna go into a next audio clip, Piper.
Yeah, absolutely. So this next audio clip is from Marvin Mayfield, who many people in this room know, was an incredible organizer, passionate advocate, passed away last year. Marvin grew up in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn in the 1960s and 70s. After serving in the Air Force, returned to Brooklyn and was arrested for a crime he didn't commit at the age of 22. After waiting 3 days in central booking to see a judge, he was given a $10,000 bail and sent to Rikers Island. Within 5 minutes of entering his cell block at Rikers, he was beaten up by a group of men who stole the gold chain around his neck and punched him in the face. He was at Rikers at the height of the war on drugs and the crack epidemic and recalls cage after cage after cage after cage at Rikers, overburdened with humanity. During his second incarceration at Rikers, he spent 3 months in solitary confinement during the summer. He talks about taking off all his clothes, dousing himself in water from his toilet to try to stay cool. Of Rikers, he says, that place is hell. So we can play his clip.
And I was just so depressed that I didn't care what happened as a result. So, as a result, they put me in the mental observation unit, right? Because I wouldn't talk. I'm in a mental observation unit. And the one thing about the mental observation unit, what they call the MO, is that the people who are least able to care for themselves are treated the worst in that environment. They're treated the worst. They put me in a cell, and I kid you not, it was covered in feces, dry feces, and I mean, why wouldn't they clean that up before they put somebody in it? I mean, there was garbage and papers and food all over the floor. The mattress in it was urine stained, just filthy. How could you put a human being in a situation like that? I sat on the floor by the gates, right, and day after day, and all they did was push a little tray, and I didn't see anybody for like maybe 3 days because it was a weekend. I didn't see anybody. So I mean, so to add to depression, add an abundance of anger, and hopelessness, and I still wouldn't talk. So they just kept sliding the food, and there was no real like ventilation or light. But I remember there was a little window, and it was so crusted with dust and dirt that you could barely tell it was day and night. But I could see, you know, day passed, night passed, day passed, night passed, and that went on for a few days until finally they took me out of that cell and put me in a different cell. Right? It was cleaner. I think they deemed that I wasn't a suicide risk. They had me speak to a psychiatrist, a doctor, or a nurse, whoever it was, I don't remember. But at that point in time, I did tell him my name, and I just spoke to him briefly. But I was still in the mental observation unit, right, which was isolation. It was solitary confinement. And I was in solitary confinement for 3 months in that condition, in the hot heat of the summer, where I had to take all my clothes off, right, just so to try to get a little bit of you know, to cool myself off. You know, the heat was unbearable. There was no ventilation. I remember feeling that this is the way I was going to die. I was going to suffocate in this cell.
Just want to take a moment, just maybe 15 seconds in silence to just digest that. To think that millions of people have gone through Rikers Island. I just want to like put that through to folks. So, you know, if anyone can take this question first. I mean, what is, you know, listening to Marlon tell us about the state of mental health protocols on the island. Listening to him, obviously your own experiences being there as well.
Yeah. So I probably did about like 2.5 years in total solitary confinement through my incarceration, and every single time that I've been in a solitary confinement unit, I always saw someone or maybe a couple of people there that you could clearly see they have a mental health challenge. And I remember this vividly as if it was yesterday. I'm going into the unit. This is a solitary confinement unit, and you know there's bars on each cell, and there was this one cell that had plexiglass over it, but the plexiglass was like smeared with feces. You couldn't even see inside of it, and it was a person who had a mental health challenge in there, and he would, like, you know, at nighttime, like scream all night and kick on the gate to the wee hours in the morning, and I'm like, why this person not getting any help? This is not he need treatment, not jail. And I saw like cases like that every time in solitary confinement. Right here in New York City, despite what the mayor says, we have solitary confinement. They call it restrictive housing. They could call it whatever they want to call it, but it's solitary confinement. Just recently, City Council passed a law to ban solitary confinement in the New York City jail system. Unfortunately, the mayor vetoed it, but City Council is standing strong and said they're going to override his veto and make it law. Because if you don't have solitary confinement in New York City, why you going to veto it if it don't exist? But it does exist, and I won't be surprised that they still have people in there with mental health challenges. So that's like one of the things that stood out to me, you know, when Marvin, you know, spoke about like his experience, and people are dying there. Just not too long ago, Layleen Polanco, you know, a young trans woman, died in solitary confinement. There's so many cases, and that's something that needs to end. And it just like burns me up when I even think about it. But that's like one of the things that popped out, you know, to me. And the other thing, the other point I want to make shortly is he mentioned about like conditions of confinement. And that's been an issue, you know, throughout history in jails and prisons throughout New York City and in New York State. Like the Attica Rebellion, if you read like the demands, like the half of the demands was about conditions of confinement. There's a collective of currently incarcerated prisoners throughout the New York throughout the country called Jailhouse Lawyers Speaks. They organized a 2018 national prison strike, and their very first demand was to address, you know, conditions of confinement in the system. And so that, you know, that's one of the other things. And for our members who experience incarceration, that's something that that's kind of like on the top of the list, like to address conditions of confinement. Because as long as one person is detained in the carceral system, that has to be addressed, because people should be living, you know, there's like human rights issues, you know, when it comes to that, and people should be living in dignity, especially pre-trial. Like, you haven't been convicted of anything. You know, the jails is for pre-trial, you know, so almost 90% of the people detained on Rikers Island are pre-trial. And if you was wealthy, you probably wouldn't see an hour in there. That reminds me of like Brian Stevenson's statement where he said we have a criminal justice system that treats the rich and guilty better than the poor and innocent. And yeah, and I'll just leave it with that. That's the system that we have right now.
I'd like for you to jump in on that, Kelly, and also if you can speak to, like, what do you think some alternatives to Rikers Island is when it comes to dealing with mental health concerns? But as you say that, just, you know, get your thoughts together. I want to introduce City Councilman Lincoln Ressler of the 33rd Council District. You give him a round of applause. So we're passing mics back and forth. Council, we're passing mics back and forth. So, you know, we're going to get it together. And so the question that, you know, so we're listening to audio clips just to bring you up to speed about what's, you know, what from firsthand experience of folks on Rikers Island. And we just heard an experience of a person who experienced the regularity of the harshness of Rikers Island. And so when the question I asked Kelly, so, you know, you can speak to the same thing in terms of, like, you know, mental health condition that you've seen experience, but also what you see as alternatives to these sort of things. And I'm asking that specifically as we have an elected official here who can also speak to some of those, that question.
So my motto is anybody, you could think you're whole when you get on that bus and you go over that bridge to Rikers, you're coming out broken. When you think mental health, what do you think? You're thinking, don't think that's also another thing. Mental health is not just our most severe mental health issues. There's everything from soup to nuts. We heard Elizabeth talk about how she cried because she missed her child, and she was sent to a psychiatric evaluation. Let that sink in, because she's crying a normal emotional reaction, and there is an issue because she needs a level of care to help her navigate with herself and everything that's going on, the missing of her child. It's so complex and multi-layered. Right now it's a mess because, of course, the system is a mess. The system always was a mess. It never changed. It just played the game and switched around. So Rikers is the de facto mental health institution right now. That's it. There is no level of care. Subpar, if best, over-medicating to keep everybody on the Thorazine shuffle and zombified. So they'll be quote compliant. Added trauma, added dehumanization, no services, cannot get, FYI, New York City does have a mental health court. Getting into a mental health court is almost impossible because you have to get what's called the 730. In order to get a 730, you have to be properly evaluated. And right now, there's people languishing on Rikers for 7 months with improper medication, improper care, decompensating, and not getting a 730 and being put through a criminal justice that is not meant for this, that didn't care about people that didn't have mental health issues. it's a trauma mill. And then they're expected to come out and be good people in society. They never received any care. In fact, they're even victimized more by the system than anything they've ever done. Again, not convicted yet. So I think in a perfect world, which is way above my pay grade, full wraparound services, and let's have a real honest conversation. The intersections, we have mental health, we have trauma, we have conditioning, we have lack of opportunities, racial disparities, criminalized poverty, criminalized neighborhoods, which aren't even, I mean, it's just based off of populations and the median income. So there's so many opportunities, but it's being limited based off bureaucratic shenanigans. So I have a lot of dreams and hopes, and hopefully one day, while I'm still alive, we're making progress in baby steps, but really, I see it every day, all day.
We're going to get to opportunity to dream a little bit towards the end. That's important. City Council, Councilman Ressler, I'm just curious, you're taking in a lot of stuff now. Instead of actually a pointed question that I have, what comes up for you right now?
Rikers Island is and has been for many, many decades a humanitarian disaster. But in the long and devastating history of Rikers Island, it has never been worse than it is today. And just like sit on that. Manuel Luna died at Rikers last week. Since Eric Adams came into office 25 months ago, 30 people have died in the care of DOC. They are unable to fulfill their most basic mandate of just keeping people alive. And you know, there aren't, I mean, and you want to know what's even worse? Is that we are sending more and more people to Rikers Island every day under this mayor. There aren't a whole lot of things that Rudy Giuliani, Mike Bloomberg, and Bill de Blasio all have in common, and even more, all got right. But under their mayoralities, we saw the population at Rikers shrink for 30 years. From Giuliani to Bloomberg to de Blasio, the population cut in half. And under the de Blasio administration, the administration cut it in half again. Just 4 years ago in 2020, we had less than 4,000 people on Rikers Island. Today, we're up at 6,200. So as the conditions worsen, the fatalities increase, the violence increases, Eric Adams' policies are to send more people there. And he has no real plan to close Rikers Island. Certainly, it's not closing under his administration if he gets reelected for 4 more years, and I hope he does not. But this is the situation that we're facing, and it's so important that we center the voices, center the experiences of the people who have lived through the devastation of Rikers Island. Because just as was said, people come out in worse shape than when they started. We care about building safety in our communities. We care about building opportunity in our communities. Sending people to Rikers Island is not the solution. It actually makes things worse.
And you stand on that.
100%.
I want to go to another, thank you for that, Councilman. I want to go to another audio clip. Piper?
Thank you. Okay, so our next clip is from Stanley Morris. In the interest of time, we're going to go straight to the clip because we have 2 more I want to get to, and I want to make sure we have time for the conversation. So go ahead.
It's hard because when you do finally get out, okay, if there's not places like this, where I'm at now, where there's so much help, you're literally in the street, you know? So you go in the street, and it's a revolving door. I'll be back in Rikers Island in 90-day stops. I've been blessed so well by coming here, even though it's not everything I've I you know, hope for, you know, like my original goal and that I want out of this is to have my own place. That's the biggest, I think that's your biggest need out of everything you get. Shelter. Once you have shelter, everything else can fall in place. So right now, for now, to today, I have this, you know, and I know this is not forever. This might be over any day. So then what, you know, what is it next? It's like the street again. Because I don't have nowhere to go. Who wants, you know, who wants to take care of a 60-year-old man? You know, like, you know, you need to have your own place, man. You know what I mean? So.
Kelly, backstage, you were talking about some of the work you've been doing when it comes to housing. If you wanted to just briefly share about that as it relates to, obviously, brother just Stanley's comments.
It hits home because I work with folks that a lot of the people I work with have come home. I call them long haulers. They've either done multiple years, they've been institutionalized, they've been for a very long time. Recently, I've been noticing and having to navigate people coming home. And I need to say this. So when you go away, Rikers upstate, prison, jail, subpar medical. So what would be considered 50 or 60 is actually physically 70 or 80. So I have a large population that I'm working with that are in their 50s. Physically, they're about 75, a host of medical issues, a host of mental health issues. No services available in New York City. No housing. They cannot work. Brilliant, smart, abstract thinkers, resourceful, strong. I could go all day with exactly how to describe. And more and more and more are coming home. And they're what I would call an easy collar. So they are arrested for absolutely absurd things, and they're sent to Rikers to either die or get let out again or put on supervised release with no housing, no access to anything, nothing. They can't get Social Security. We could try for SSI, but unless we have a special housing ferry, that's not going to pay the rent. And these are people that are important to our community. This is someone's grandpa. This is someone, most of their families have passed away while they were away, so they have absolutely no support. That's where I come in. Be as supportive as possible, to be a cheerleader when there's nobody left. Real quick. I just want you to imagine this. You've always been in a situation, whether it be a shelter or you've been incarcerated. And this is the story I was talking about. I have someone who got their first apartment. Yay, amazing. Do you know that apartment feels like for that person? Solitary. They feel like they're in solitary. This should be a joyous moment, joyous occasion. Yes, yes. No, it's solitary. It's connecting people. And it's connecting, and that's actually a great point about the Rikers Public Memory Project, because you know what? He's not alone. And I have tons and tons and tons of these folks, and nothing. 16 to 24, absolutely. But more and more are coming home for ridiculous charges from way back when, and now are getting rearrested for ridiculous charges instead of the care that they need, or a little extra support. And have to go through the system again and navigate it at 55, 60. It's heartbreaking.
It's something that you said earlier when you just sort of speaking about Rikers, like once you go across that bridge and you come back broken a little bit. And there's levels to brokenness. And I think that's what you're speaking to, because many other stories and examples of it. I mean, on this, should we go straight to the next video, or can we? Yeah, I'm curious on this conversation around housing. supportive housing. Yeah, I'm coming to you, councilman. I mean, what strategies are there in place for folks, folks that Kelly is speaking about, for Stanley that was we just heard from?
Not enough. And it's an area that we need to be making significant new investments. As we said a moment ago, Rikers is the largest psychiatric facility in the state of New York. 55% of people at Rikers today have what are called a BRAD H designation, which basically means that they have significant mental health needs. And so we need to be thinking about housing solutions that include on-site services and support for people who are exiting. One of the silver, I always, it's during times of crisis that people can, I think, often innovate and come up with new solutions. And one of those solutions that came about during the pandemic that I thought was a very positive one was something that's been termed reentry hotels. And Exodus, and Stanley, I think, was associated with Exodus, the last speaker, initially operated a number of these hotels. And located throughout the city, including one just a couple blocks from here in downtown Brooklyn that was a tremendous success, were places where people would come upon release from Rikers or state facilities, have nonprofit on-site Exodus providing support, providing connection to services, providing connection to employment, and helping folks get back on their feet. Temporary as a solution for sure, transitional housing, but an incredibly important thing to help people on their way out who don't have an alternative place to go. And in fact, you have a lot of judges who, if they had the opportunity to know that somebody was going to stable housing, they wouldn't send that person to Rikers in the first place. And so it's really important that we expand those opportunities for transitional and supportive housing for formerly incarcerated individuals. It's called justice-involved supportive housing. And a big part of the agreement to close Rikers that the city came to a few years ago included a promise for new investments in justice-involved supportive housing. We have not seen this administration, I know this is like a trend, you're gonna hear me just saying things that Eric Adams is not doing all night, but we have not seen this administration follow through on those commitments around creating more justice-involved supportive housing, and we need to do it. I am deeply proud that the largest supportive housing, wait, let me just actually back up a second. Does everyone know what supportive housing is? Supportive housing is affordable housing with on-site services. So you'll have social workers, clinicians, staff on-site in the building if it's congregate supportive housing. There's also scatter site supportive housing where the nonprofit will help you rent out an apartment. They'll rent that apartment for you, and then they'll go visit you a couple times a week to provide services and make sure you're doing all right. Supportive housing is the best solution, the evidence-based solution for addressing homelessness for people who have for addressing chronic homelessness, and is critically important for helping us to reduce incarceration in New York City. The largest supportive housing development in Brooklyn opened while I was a council member just a couple blocks from here in Dumbo, in the wealthiest neighborhood in Brooklyn, nearly 500 unit building. We need to be thinking as aggressively as we can about building and convert new supportive housing, converting buildings into supportive housing, thinking about using hotels as transitional hotels to help provide housing for people who are exiting incarceration. These are cost-effective interventions. Think about how many hundreds of thousands of dollars a year it costs to put somebody on Rikers Island. Think about the tiny fraction that it costs to keep somebody, to let somebody have their own apartment and live independently in supportive housing. That is the right way for us to safely reduce incarceration and ultimately get back on a pathway to closing Rikers Island.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Councilman. By show of hands here, here's an easy question. By show of hands here, how many people want to see Rikers Island close? Good, great. I see you over there. That's right, clap on it. I see you. So as I'm walking here, I run into a gentleman who I haven't seen in years. I said, I'm going to the Rikers Public Memory Project. And he says, I got a problem with Rikers Island and this closure thing. And he says, everybody thinks that once we close Rikers Island and we put people in the borough jails, everything is going to be better. So my question is, the closure, and here's the hard question, right? I asked you the easy question, and speaking to our folks here on the stage, we close Rikers Island. How can we ensure that this closure of it transforms how we look at, deal with, work with, and interact with the criminal legal system when it comes to pretrial detention?
Yeah, I could get us started. Yeah, so if Rikers was closing Rikers was easy, it would have been done a long time ago. I remember the late great Herb Stirs. He was the founder of the Vera Institute, right? And he was tapped by Mayor Koch, I believe, to be like the deputy mayor of criminal justice. This was like what, the 70s? Mm-hmm. And then we need to close Rikers Island back then, but it was like a lot of pushback and a lot of fear mongering, and Rikers still exists today, so those efforts were made. But
half a century ago.
Yeah, but a grassroots movement of directly impacted people, family members and survivors of Rikers came together and changed the hearts and minds of New Yorkers to understand that Rikers can't be fixed, Rikers can't be reformed. The only solution is closure. And like in the city, there's 10 jails on Rikers Island. A lot of people don't know that, so I have to say that. There's 10 facilities on Rikers Island. Then we have the boat, which is adjacent to the Bronx, and a jail next to the court in each borough, just like it is all across the country. Brooklyn, the Queens facility, the Manhattan facility known as the Tombs. So for those that have been in New York for a long time, have you heard of this tragic and travesty that's been happening, in the borough facilities when it was open, like Brooklyn House or, the Tombs? You don't hear about the deaths and stuff like that for various reasons. One is accessible. It's accessible to families. It's accessible to attorneys. It's accessible to medics. And that's one of the reasons why Rikers Island, because it's isolated, out of place, there's only one way on and one way off, it's not accessible. And a lot of bad stuff happens out there because when it's out of sight, out of mind, a lot of bad stuff when it's not transparent. And because of, so in regards to like not transferring, infrastructure is like one piece of it. Is a crumbling institution, is crumbling infrastructure on Rikers Island. But the other piece of it is the culture as well. So in 2019, City Council passed a law to close Rikers Island by 2027. And with that, they also set up commissions, like a commission of community reinvestment and the closure of Rikers Island. I'm a member on this commission, and this commission is dedicated to sharing budget recommendations in communities to basically close the pipelines that's feeding Rikers Island in the first place. So like mental health, like supportive housing, like all these things. And then there's also a committee on culture change, to change the culture of Rikers Island, to change the culture of people who staff the Rikers Island, to look at people not as, inmates or, but look at them as human beings. So all that work is actually happening in the process right now, but that's just like, those elements have to be, pushed forward and implemented in order to like address that culture change, that mindset, to look at people as human beings, because people there pre-trial. A lot of people like go to Rikers Island for a week, 2 weeks, or a month or a year, and they come home. And they're gonna return back to the community. So a lot of things need to happen. Like one of the things, like as far as the infrastructure piece, which is very important, like on Rikers Island, it might take 5, 10, 15 minutes for a medic to get to a person who's in need. But the way that we envisioned the design of the borough facility to have a medical unit, a medical clinic on each unit, so it's easy access, fast access to the person who's in need of some medical emergency. So that's just like some of the things, and it's like much more, but I could get into. But it's like just some of the things that could, we fingers crossed and we hope, but we know that my experience living in New York City, I haven't heard of the atrocities and the deaths coming in the borough facility, exist in the borough facilities like it exists on Rikers
Island. One more and before the next clip. You got a little time for one more question, but before we get to the next clip? Yeah. Well, how can we ensure, and I'm looking at you, Councilman Russell, how can we ensure, there's a number 2027, that's 3 years from now, right? Darren was just talking about, this conversation started, I don't want to put in people's mind, half a century ago. So how we can ensure we're not waiting another half a century when our kids or grandkids are having this conversation in the Brooklyn Library?
It's a It's I think the question that everybody's asking themselves these days. Just to give a little background, I previously worked for Mayor de Blasio and had the privilege of working on the plan to close Rikers, where I got to know some amazing people like Darren, who is one of the most important voices in New York City, holding all of the powers that be accountable to make sure that the closure of Rikers actually happens. And it's the reason that Bill de Blasio came around and embraced the plan to close Rikers is because of the extraordinary activism of people who have been through the system. And it is the ongoing activism of those same voices that are gonna hold whoever the mayor is accountable to making sure that this happens. I have the responsibility of representing the jail here in Brooklyn. And so it's just 6 blocks away. I grew up 2 blocks over this way. I keep pointing out all the things that are in the neighborhood, because that's my job. I'm a parochial council member. And so I'm responsible for helping to steward the construction of this new jail and making sure that it happens. Last night, we had yet another design workshop where members of the community, formerly incarcerated individuals, all different kinds of folks came to give input on the design of the new borough-based jail here in Brooklyn. And there's a lot of positive things to say about it. There are definitely some issues that we still need to work through. But we need to make sure, but the plan to close Rikers requires us to build new facilities here in Brooklyn, in Lower Manhattan, in Central Queens, in the South Bronx, and it also requires Mayor Adams to do the work to actually drive down the population so that we have fewer people who are incarcerated who can fit within these 4 borough-based jails. While the law requires him to do so by 2027, the first of the borough-based jails is not slated to open, if things go smoothly, until 2029. So he is saying very publicly, without any inhibition, that he has no intention to comply with the plan, the requirements. He has no intention to comply with the law to close Rikers Island by 2027. 0. That is his public posture. And we're gonna have to put a whole lot of pressure on him. I think we're gonna have to think about litigation strategies to force him and his administration to stick to a timeline to close Rikers as quickly as possible if he is reelected in 2025. But I think we would be much better off if we had a mayor who was actually committed to closing Rikers Island as quickly as possible and reducing the incarcerated population in New York City.
I have many thoughts. We don't have enough time for that just now. Probably want to go to one more, to the final clip.
Okay, so we're going to go to our last clip. So Ty McField, as Darren was saying, like, you know, when we think about directly impacted, we think about both people who have, you know, directly experienced incarceration and detainment, as well as loved ones and family members. And Ty has had a number of family members who have been at Rikers and has supported them and their process of reentry. And so we're going to close with their clip.
And unfortunately, like, until it became commonplace on the news that there was even like a campaign to close Rikers, people had no concept of what was even happening there. So I felt conflicted a lot of times, because I'm like, what a privilege you must live to not know anyone that you even have heard of this place. And it was kind of like this mixed feeling of like guilt from my community that I grew up in and that I was still living in, that so many people could not know what Rikers was. And then this other side, sort of like in educational spaces or like professional spaces that I was in, people had like no idea. It was like, when I would talk about it, it was kind of like, I don't know if I could even say this, but it was kind of like porn for them. They were like, you know, tell me more, you know, oh, I can't believe this is happening. So there was like moral outrage on that side, but like no action. So that was sort of like the whiplash of experiences that I was having, like within multiple pockets of community that I was growing up in, and feeling like a bridge between both, but always like encouraging, like not to speak for people, like get in there, like understand for yourself, like what's happening, ask some damn questions. I don't know. It always brings up like a piece of anger that you just have to know something so intimately because of broken systems and injustice. And at the same time, I would be remiss if I didn't say this, for other sides of my family, Rikers was a way out because they were able to get jobs as correctional officers that allowed them to sort of advance in their career trajectory. So it was this very like strange dystopic experience all in one.
Wow. I come from a place of learning of folks like Eddie Ellis, who, and many other folks. I want to shout out Joseph Jazz Hayden, who a staunch advocate for an incarcerated gentleman who passed away recently, lived an important life. But I come from a place of thinking that, you know, while we think about the criminal justice system, we got to think about the social determinants that are putting people in those places in the first place, right? And I'm just curious for folks to just jump in and on the popcorn way, like, you know, what can we do to invest in the generationally divested communities who are the main consumers of Rikers Island? Or I should better flip it, who Rikers Island has consumed.
Yeah, speaking of Eddie Ellis and Jazz, Eddie Ellis, a formerly incarcerated, brilliant mind, he was like part instrumental in what's known as the Greenhaven think tank, where they actually did a study, and this was like what, the late 70s. Yeah, did
out of the Attica Rebellion.
Yeah, it came out of the Attica Rebellion. Did a study about the 7 neighborhoods in New York City where they found out that over 75% of New York State's prison population came from 7 New York City neighborhoods. You know, the South Bronx, Harlem, Lower East Side, Bronzeville, Bedford-Stuyvesant, East New York, and South Jamaica, Queens. And if you're from New York and you think about these communities, you like, that makes sense, because even today, you know, most of those communities have been impacted by historical divestment. You know, probably the investments that were made in those communities was like over-policing, hyper-policing, and those same communities that feed, you know, the prison system, you know, upstate, throughout the state, they're also the communities that's feeding Rikers Island. So, you know, we've been calling on, you know, city council and this mayor, and city council was on board. The borough presidents are on board. The public advocate is on board. The speaker, Adams, is on board about investing in the communities to close the pipelines that feed Rikers. You know, investing in supportive housing, investing in mental health. In fact, New Yorkers even want investments in housing and mental health. There was one of the largest public surveys that was done almost 2 years ago, New York City Speaks, the largest public surveys in the history of the city, that said, you know, what are the most priorities for New York? Housing, and I think mental health was second. So that's where it's at. We just heard half of the population on Rikers Island has a mental health issue. Making investments in the communities and healthcare, boom, the population slashed in half. So, you know, just making those investments, man. There's a commission on community reinvestment that we made budget recommendations, you know, in regards to address those issues. The mayor likes to talk about it a lot. I'm gonna punch on the mayor too a little bit. He likes, anytime he asks about a Rikers Island, you could Google it and see the video. Anytime he's asked about Rikers, he said, oh, half of the population have the mental health issue. Half the population has a mental health issue. 90% has a serious chronic mental health issue. But he hasn't lifted a finger to do anything about it. And that's the reality. So we got to push and pull, and, you know, so he could do something, because city council is doing something. They presenting, you know, budget recommendations to address the issue. So we got to push and pull the mayor, you know, to, you know, make those investments, because right now he's on the wrong side of history.
Before we go, we're going to come to the audience and ask some questions. I want to ask you if I could. I want to pose the last. You can answer the same question I asked in terms of how we should reinvest, but I want to give you the opportunity to dream for us. Kelly, as somebody who's been on all sides, who's been impacted by it directly, obviously, and works with folks now, what would it be, if you can dream, what would be your dream for a New York City post Rikers Island?
Shut down all the pipelines. It's not, there's a lot of pipelines. There's a lot of systems, and they're all a pipeline. So you have Child Protective Services, you have ACS, you have foster care pipeline, you have school to prison pipeline. I could go all day. And the city's permeated. Country's permeated, but if we want to talk about New York City, permeated with pipelines everywhere you look. And everywhere you look, those pipelines, which we talked about the neighborhoods, those pipelines are for the select few that don't fit the othering, the black, brown, and the poor. The ones that don't fit society's constructs. We could go all day with the othering, because there's a whole bunch of othering, and that feeds that pipeline. Because instead of making investments, we'll just lock them up. And we'll keep locking them up. And it's not going to end. And then we'll put them in a shelter, and there's the other pipeline. And then we're going to hospitalize them, force medicate them, and then throw them into the street with no place to live. And that's another pipeline. You got the medical pipeline. We could talk all day about that as well.
Thank you so much for that, Kelly. Thank you. Because what you are in essence saying, that Rikers Island, the closing of Rikers Island, is not the end. Oh, no. Thank you, everyone. Give the panel a round of applause. Thank you, Councilman Ressler, Kelly Briem, Darren Mack. So we got some time for you all to jump in here and ask some questions. Please do your thing. Ask a question, let it go.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for your honesty. I just wanted to touch base on the archiving of memory that we're basing this entire evening about. I wanted to ask, have there been considerations about archiving the adolescent memory as well regarding Rikers and Spofford and how these are all interconnected? Because I don't know if people know, but you're eligible for Rikers at 16. And as someone born and raised in Brooklyn, grew up with a lot of folks that shared many stories of brutality at the ages of 16 and coming back. So I think it's very important to, uplift the adolescents and archive their memory as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you for that. Yes, absolutely. I spent over 10 years working with adolescents on Rikers Island, which is how I came to start doing this work. And so within our collection, we do have interviews with people who were on Rikers as young people, as children, as adolescents, and 16 and 17, 18 years old. So that is, so I encourage you all to go onto the website and to, it's organized really well. Like, you can look at so many different categories, including youth, and hear some of the stories of people who were there at Rikers as adolescents. But I do feel like it's something that I want to continue to build on, because I worked in the high school, and I think that there's so many stories that we still haven't even been able to gather yet, of people who graduated high school. I attended a lot of graduations at Rikers, on the island, and what that experience was like for them, having to finish out your high school career inside of Rikers Island. So that's something that the collection is still growing, and there's still a number of different groups and social identities that we want to make sure that are reflected in within the collection. So we encourage you to join our mailing list, and if you have ideas about who we should interview, and you want to partner with us to do more interviews, we'd love to work with you.
I love that question. Just one positive piece of news is that about 5 or 6 years ago, New York became the 49th out of 50 states to finally treat 16 and 17-year-olds as children. And so we passed in New York State something called Raise the Age, so that young adult, 16 and 17-year-olds are no longer sent to Rikers. They go to the 2 facilities that are run by ACS, Crossroads out in Brownsville, Ocean Hill, Brownsville, and Horizons in the South Bronx. The unfortunate news is that over these last 2 years since Mayor Adams came into office, we've seen about a doubling of the population of 16 and 17-year-olds and younger minors who are in our youth facilities. They have grown so much in population that kids are sleeping in classrooms, that they're trying to plan for a $70-odd million expansion of the Horizon Center. They want to do another expansion at Crossroads so that they can put more minors, kids, in jail. It is horrible. And these are policy decisions that our city is making, and we have to fight back against them. And I promise you, and I'm working on legislation in the council to do just that, to force the administration to drive down the number of minors, kids, who we're sending to jail, because it is absolutely wrong.
It's important work. Build it and they will come. It's important work. Right. We have a question here, and I know a hand over here.
Thank you. Thank you, brothers, for sharing, and the sisters for sharing. My colleagues and I from Queens Defenders, one of the things we'd like to know is how can we contribute to what you all are doing, and how can we reimagine a society where there are no jails, so there are no prisons, so that culture from Rikers Island doesn't get replicated in some of these borough jails. And just to make a comment, I'd like to say that my colleague Sheldon Johnson and I, while we were incarcerated, we realized that some 50% of the people incarcerated in the country are dealing with dyslexia, which is a whole, which is just a huge secret, right? So they're going home without addressing their dyslexic, and you know, if a person cannot properly read, there's a stigma associated with that, or they have a different way of processing information, and no one is doing much about it. We presented a proposal last year through Hudson Link, an organization that funded our education while we were inside. And we just want to know how we can collectively come together with you all. As you know, Darren and I, we know each other for a long time. How we can collectively come together, because Queen Defenders are here, and our policy attorney, esteemed Gina Mitchell, beside me here, would like to know how we can get involved. And council member, you know, let's just talk to us, because we're ready here, and you know, we got boots on the ground. We got a team, and we want to really get involved more with what you all are doing.
How can they crew up? How can they crew up? They got a question over here.
Just quickly, like, you know, get involved with the coalition. You know, the Campaign to Close Rikers is a coalition of 180 organizations. Just today, we was outside of the mayor's State of the City address, having a rally with even a much broader coalition, like the People's Plan and Communities United for Police Reform, and you know, and just get involved, because we can't do it by ourselves, individuals. We can't do it as individual organizations. We have to join together and join a coalition. And there's a lot of ways and levers and buttons that we got to push. So the more organizations that get on board, the more work, you know, we could, you know, push this work forward.
Exchange emails as soon as this panel is over. Gentleman right there on the side.
Hello. Thank you very much. It was very informative. My question is more so, what is your thoughts on alternatives to incarceration? Like, I'm with a nonprofit called Young New Yorkers, and we provide art-based alternatives to incarceration for youth between 12 to 25. And I think it's pretty cool because they get their record sealed upon completion. They learn about artists that they never heard of before, Candy Wiley or Chimmy Ngozi, and right now we're doing Henry Taylor. And it adds, I feel like it adds another layer to themselves, where now they not only learn about the art, they make a piece based on that, where it might be ceramics or painting. But what's interesting is when we speak to some of these youth, you realize that like they're more so hard on themselves, or the guilt. They're between 12 and 25, and this allows them to have a second chance. It saves the city tons of money instead of having them in jail. And just curious in everybody's thought on alternatives to incarceration instead of just locking them up or having them on Rikers.
There should always be alternatives to incarceration. That should be the absolute, and especially for young people, because their brains are still growing. There's so much that, you know how I was saying it's like complex and multi-layered. So there's damage done that needs to be healed. You're talking about they're harder on themselves. Society puts a heavy burden on people. But there should always be, and the program that you're talking about, how amazing is that? That didn't exist. None of the coalition, none of this existed. And it's because of the work of everyone, Queens defenders, Bronx defenders, Brooklyn defenders. I mean, we could go all day. None of this existed. And the ATIs, you took a plea. Whether you were 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, it didn't matter. You took a plea to get off that island. And the young folks would take pleas, and little did they know, they might have took a 1 to 3, and they had a life sentence. Because when they came home, they couldn't get housing. They couldn't get work. They couldn't vote at the time. Couldn't do anything. So everything is a progress, and I absolutely agree with you with ATIs. ATIs should be the first point, and there should be more. And more thinking outside the box. Because then again, by thinking outside the box and creating programs, as you were explaining, if you keep doing the same thing, expecting different results, is that an insanity cycle, right? Insanity. So then the ATIs become another arm of the system. And by expanding and thinking outside the box and giving people opportunities and giving people choices, that's another thing that's empowering. Giving people choices. You like art, you like music, you like reading, what are your interests? And planting the seed and watching it grow, as versus stifling it and slowly and painfully killing it. Thank you.
I have a question. Can I pull an audible really quick? I have questions back there that a few ladies back there, they didn't get in. So if you can come back to you. Don't lose your train of thought. All right, come back. We just get questions back there. I'll get the mic.
All right, I don't need a mic. Just want to say that. But great evening, everyone. I just want to say thank you to the panelists. Excellent job. 430 plus women and gender expansive people that is at the Rose M. Singer Center right now on Rikers.
Can you put that on the microphone because it's being streamed? We want them to hear that.
430 plus women and gender expansive folks are on Rikers Island right now at the Rose M. Singer Center. The city is now proposing to take the new borough-based jail from 150 beds that we advocated for to 450 beds. Kelly, please talk about why, A, it is important that we get the smallest population off of Rikers Island right now, tonight, maybe about 3 hours ago. And the other thing, why it's so detrimental on this new old expansion of this borough-based jail for the women and gender expansive people versus decarcerating them.
Unpopular opinion, I don't like the borough-based jail. Been there, done that. I already been there. Giuliani did it. And I think the reason why the numbers went down during Giuliani is because everybody went upstate. Not because he's incarcerated. You weren't here when I said 13,000 women passed through Rikers in 1996 in the height of his administration. And yes, we need to decarcerate, particularly for our women and our gender expansive, ASAP. The level of threat and the level of recidivism is very, very small. The level of care is minimal. The added trauma, not only the added trauma of being a woman on Rikers, many are mothers and caretakers. So now you've created a generational, you've created another pipeline, but you've also created more historical trauma and more generational trauma. And when I said plant seeds, these women who I've known for a very long time, because we have the shared lived experience, are some of the most amazingly strong, smart, caring people. And by incarcerating them on Rikers, again, I can pretty much guarantee you, because a lot of times I look at the charges, why? For what? There's no rhyme or reason. It's not doing anything. It's creating more pipelines and feeding it. And by the time everybody gets spit out of it, the damage is deep, and it takes time and no services to start growing again. So I love you, Reverend Sharon. But the borough base, Darren made some great points, but I've been there, done that. This isn't new. So, and the biggest thing I have to say is the culture, because the culture hasn't changed. I've been back there. It's the same thing from the 1990s, and before that, it was the same thing from the 70s and the 80s. It's culture, and it's also just like generational trauma. A lot of the corrections officers, generational. So, grandpa was a correction officer, dad was a correction officer, son is a correction officer. Each year, more biases, more labels and stigmas are added to it, so it's just generational.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Sharon. Gentlemen, you have probably the final question.
Good evening. My name is Sheldon Johnson. I'm formerly incarcerated. I spent 25 years and 5 months straight in prison. I spent about 7 years in solitary confinement, 3 on Rikers Island in the 90s. And one thing I got into while I was incarcerated was civics, right? And what I realized and what I think, when you talk about litigation strategies, right, I don't think that I'm hearing enough of formerly incarcerated families and justice impacted people going out and specifically and strategically targeting these people who are in office, assembly, council, senators, mayors, and having them removed. I think that as a voting bloc, we represent a huge number of voters, and strategically, cohesively, moving in one direction would be very, very effective. So what are some of the litigation strategies, and are there any litigation strategies involved around civics where we're specifically targeting the Carl Heasties and the people who are specifically blocking certain bills and having them removed?
Folks, whoever can answer that, but you raised a very important point, and I think I just really want to implore and encourage, not only should formerly incarcerated people be pushing folks, formerly incarcerated people need to be running for office. We need to think about the next step of it. The next step of it, right? Because the way the 50 years happened was one administration loophole at a time. That's how it happened to be 50 years. This can be another 50 years. We need folks who are impassioned, aware of and about these issues, who can speak directly to it with the level of expertise that we have. So I encourage and implore to not only be pushed for folks to be advocating as we should, but we also need to be putting ourselves in positions to be running and holding these offices. And also, if there are any barriers in those places, there's a place of advocacy to be removing barriers, if there are any barriers to running for office. That is the next stage I sort of really want to encourage for all of us to be a part of. I'm sorry, yeah, answer. I'm a moderator. I'm not well, I'm leaving it on you because you are, I mean, how can you, this is off the wing, and then we'll sort of, I guess, conclude the conversation, right, Piper? what can you do as elected official to encourage, to create opportunities, pathways for formerly incarcerated folks to be in city council?
I am very proud to share that as of January 1st of this year, we do have a formerly incarcerated individual who is serving on the city council. And not only is he serving on the city council, but Yusuf Salam is also chairing our public safety committee. And so the member of the Central Park 5 representing Harlem is the person leading our oversight of the NYPD each and every day in the city of New York. That is a powerful thing. But we need more Yusuf Salams. We need more people who have been through the system and are centering those experiences. Eddie Gibbs is another one representing East Harlem who's serving in the Assembly, who is a formerly incarcerated individual. But as we were sitting here, we were thinking those were the two people that came to mind. There should be more, considering the number of people, tragically, that have been impacted by our criminal justice system. And Yusuf is exonerated, absolutely. But he spent time in the system. And that experience is a powerful thing. And we need more people who have, or family members who've been through the system, who are there every day pushing as hard as we can together to make the closure of Rikers a reality, to shrink our criminal justice system, to reduce the number of people who are getting arrested, to reduce the number of summons that are issued, to reduce the number of people who are incarcerated, to reduce the number of kids who are incarcerated. These are urgent responsibilities that fall on all of us to make happen, and we need elected officials who actually care about it. And so I would say, yes, it's encouraging people to run. It's also making sure that people who may not have been through the system, when they're running, that you're asking them these questions. Where do you stand on these issues? Are you an ally? Can we count on you? And there are a lot of good folks in this city council. There are a lot of good folks in the state legislature. We need executives who care about it as well. And we could use more, don't get me wrong. We could use more allies, please. But we do not have the mayor and the governor. These are not North Stars for them. How about I say it that way? And that matters. Because ultimately, our Department of Corrections, the NYPD, they report to the mayor. And we need a mayor who is going to start working with our communities, working with the city council to bring the kind of reform, culture change, accountability that we need.
Thank you all. I just want to conclude by saying we understand the utility of the Rikers Public Memory Project. You see the type of conversation that it evoked tonight. What memory does when you have these stories, and stories of folks who have been directly impacted are centered in this one room, little room here we are in Brooklyn Heights. Right, so I want to once again just commend everyone here, obviously Piper for being the brains of this entire thing, bringing us together. I don't know if there's any final words you would like to offer.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. And I want to just encourage you to continue to stay in community with us. And you know, there's going to be lots of opportunities for us to gather and be in conversation and to continue this work together. This year, one of the things that we're working on, we have compiled, with our resident historian, we've compiled like a 100-year history of Rikers Island. And so we're developing a curriculum, and we're going to be doing a professional development with educators later this year, because we want to encourage people to teach Rikers as a part of New York City history. And when you look at the history, you see that over and over again from the very beginning, there's always been these cycles of demanding its reform because it's corrupt and because of all the violence, and then expansion, right? And then you see it also shaping the culture of New York City in these really insidious ways that we don't talk about at all. And so we want to make that history really visible and make it a part of something that young people are learning in the classroom and that college students are learning. And so, so that's something that's coming up this coming year, as well as we're developing a memorial quilt as well to to document and to honor the people who have died at Rikers over its history as well. And so we encourage you to join us in some of the workshops that we're going to be doing around that. And lots of other things that, in ways that you can get involved and stay engaged in the project. So thank you all for being here tonight. And really, like we all talked about here, like this closure of Rikers really requires all of us to roll up our sleeves and commit to organizing, commit to showing up, and commit to demanding that this mayor be accountable to the people. So go to work. Go to work, everyone. Thank you.